Introduction to ArrayLists. In this video, we will introduce the ArrayList object and some of its basic methods. So far in this unit, we've seen that arrays can be extremely useful in our programs, but they come with one huge weakness. And that weakness is the fact that they can't change size. Once an array is initialized, its size becomes fixed. It cannot shrink or grow. This is a big deal because in the real world, this is often not how data works. For example, a city's population is constantly changing. It's always growing and shrinking. The number of customers on Amazon, constantly changing. It's always growing or shrinking. They're always gaining or losing customers. Social media profiles. Some people have 1,000 posts, some have 2 posts, and we're constantly adding to it, and we're constantly removing from it. And we can't just assume that every person who has a social media profile will have 1,000 posts. If we did that, we'd be wasting a lot of memory. Hence the need to have objects that have the ability to shrink and grow as needed. Hence the need for ArrayList. So, how do we create an ArrayList in our program? The first step is to import it. If we don't first import it into our program, Java will not allow us to use it in our program. So that's the first step towards using it. Then, after we do that, when we get inside our main method, we can now declare an ArrayList object by, of course, typing the word ArrayList. After that, inside a pair of alligators, I then write the type of values I want the ArrayList to store. In this case, I want my ArrayList to store doubles. But notice I wrote double with a capital D, not a lowercase d. This is an example of a wrapper class, which I will explain more later on in the video. For now, just know that this ArrayList will store doubles. After that, I'm going to type the name of the ArrayList. Then on the other side of the equal sign, we'll type the new keyword, followed by, once again, the word ArrayList and the type of values that the ArrayList will be storing, which in this case is doubles, and an empty set of parentheses. Now, before we move on further with the code, let's first explain wrapper classes. A wrapper class is a class that contains or wraps a primitive data type. For example, the wrapper class for the primitive type int is integer. The wrapper class for the primitive type char is character. The wrapper class for the primitive type double with a lowercase d is double with an uppercase d. And the wrapper class for the primitive boolean with a lowercase b is boolean with an uppercase b. Notice that the names for each wrapper class are all capitalized. Now, I could spend the whole video discussing the differences between a wrapper class and the primitive type that it wraps. For this course, however, it'll be good enough to just think of a wrapper class as a primitive object with more capabilities. As you know, primitive data types don't have instance methods, they don't have instance variables, they don't have static methods or static variables or anything like that. Wrapper classes, however, do have those things, and it allows us to be able to do things with them that we otherwise would not be able to do with the primitive data type. However, they do take up memory and can be a little more time consuming to use, so we typically don't use them unless we need to. And in the case of working with ArrayList, we do need to because ArrayList cannot store primitive values, but they can store the wrapper classes that correspond to those primitive values. So going back to our program, I just created an ArrayList and currently it is empty. It has no values in it. To add values to an ArrayList, we use the add method. For example, suppose I want to add 5.0 to the ArrayList. I would simply type nums.add 5.0 and then that value will get added to the ArrayList at index 0. Then suppose I want to add 2.5 to the ArrayList. I would simply type nums.add 2.5 and then that value will get added to the back of the ArrayList at index 1. Then if I want to add 10.3 to the ArrayList, I would type nums.add 10.3 and then that value will get added to the end of the ArrayList at index 2. And this is how we add values to an ArrayList. Now suppose I want to retrieve one of the values from the ArrayList, perhaps to store the value inside a variable or simply to print it out. To retrieve values from an ArrayList, we use the get method. For example, suppose I want to retrieve the value at index 1 to store in a variable. I'll simply say nums.get1 and then assign that value to the variable I want to store the value in. Thus, when I print out x to the screen, 2.5 gets output because that was the value at index 1 of the ArrayList. Similarly, if I want to print out the value at index 2, I'd simply type nums.get2. And when I output that to the screen, 10.3 gets output because that's the value that was at index 2 of the array list. Now, suppose I want to change one of the values in the array list. For example, suppose I want to change the value at index 0 from 5.0 to 15.0. Well, to change the values in an array list, we use the set method. So if I want to change the value at index 0 from 5.0 to 15.0, first I'll need to type nums.set, with nums being the name of the array list and set being the name of the method that I need. Then inside the parentheses, I need two pieces of information. First, I need the index of the value I want to change. Since I'm changing the first value, I'm going to type 0. And then after the comma, I'm going to type the value I want to change it to, which in this case is 15.0. When I do that, the first value in the array list gets changed to 15.0. Thus, when I print out the value at index 0 of the array list, 15.0 gets output to the screen because that's the new value at that index. Now suppose I want to add another value to the array list, but rather than simply add it to the back of the array list, I want to add it to a specific position in the array list. For example, suppose I want to add a value at index 1 of the array list. I don't want to replace the value at index 1, I simply want to make room for a new value at index 1. To do that, once again, I'm going to need the add method, but inside the parentheses, I'm going to need not one, but two pieces of information. I'm going to need two parameters. First, I'm going to need the index where I want to add the value, which in this case is 1. Then, after the comma, I type the value that I want inserted at that index, which in this case will be 7.25. When I do that, the values at index 1 and onward all get shifted to the right one spot. This creates space for the new value, 7.25. We've now seen several ways that we can grow our array list. Now let's discuss the ways we can shrink our array list. To remove a value from an array list, we use the remove method. For example, suppose I want to remove the first value in the array list. I would first type nums.remove, nums of course being the name of the array list and remove being the name of the method that I need. Then inside the parentheses, I need to type the index of the value I want removed, which in this case is 0 because I want to remove the first value in the array list. When you remove a value from the array list, what happens next is that each value after it moves up one spot. The last method we'll discuss is the one we use for retrieving the number of values currently in an array list. To retrieve the number of values in an array list, we use the size method. For example, suppose inside my print statement, I write nums.size. Since 3 values are currently in the array list, 3 is the number that will get output to the screen.